As you're tracing your fish with the Sharpie marker, I do recommend you stick to a relatively limited palette. A couple quick tips and reminders about the Sharpies. We want to really pull them more than we're pushing them away from us. If you're pulling them sideways, that's usually okay. The front of the marker is called the nib, and the longer we can keep it in that point, the longer the marker is going to continue to work really smoothly for us and do a good job. So instead of pushing really hard, I'm actually not pushing down at all. I'm just moving the marker along the paper, and the ink is coming out without me even pushing down. Similarly, whenever I'm done using a particular marker, I want to make sure that I am closing the marker all the way by not just putting the cap on, because it's not closed yet. There's a gap there, and that gap would let air in and the marker would dry out. I have to push and twist to fully ensure that my Sharpie marker is closed. Whenever you're done with one color you're using, you can bring it back to the bin. I personally think that keeping a more limited color palette can be really helpful. I think it'll keep our fish from looking too chaotic or cluttered, but that's an opinion of mine. If you want to use a lot of colors, you can use the colors you want because you are the artist. So I've traced the scales here, then I'm going to do the same thing with the fins. Again, you can use any colors you want, but we want to be as gentle as we can with the Sharpie markers so that they last a really long time. I'm also trying to stay close to my pencil lines. For me, I decided to lightly erase without erasing all the way my pencil lines before I traced. You can also, after you've traced, especially when you're done the whole thing, take an eraser and really clean up those pencil lines. That way, it'll just make our artwork look even better. Some of them won't erase all the way if they've already been traced over, and that's okay. It's fun to experiment with the order of things and find out which way you like to create your artwork. When your artwork is traced, it might look something like this. Again, if you want, you can erase your lines. If you used blacking, obviously it would look like all of your lines are black. It's really your choice as the artist. The next step after tracing, we're going to use some water-based paint to lay down a layer of color. I've got a half cup of water that I would share with people at my table, a brush that I want to be very gentle with. What that means is I'm only ever going to use the tip of the brush to paint with. I don't want to smash the brush all the way flat to the paper because that's not actually using the best part of the brush to paint with. So I'm going to be very gentle, being smooth and pulling the brush, never pushing it or smashing it. I've also got paint that I would share with my table, and I'm ready to make choices about the overall background colors I want of my fish and of the water. Since it's water-based paint, whatever color I use, I'll have to gently put a drop of water or two right on top of that paint color to activate it. And I can let the water sit there and start to absorb onto the paint. And then, once the water has begun to absorb, I will stir my paintbrush around to use the paint. So I'm just going to swirl gently. Again, I'm not smashing. You can also pull the brush towards you in a stroking motion, and that'll help pick up the color of paint, and we're ready to use it to paint our artwork. Now, this isn't necessarily the last step of our artwork. When I am painting today, I'm sort of just going to be going over my Sharpie lines and laying down a base layer of color. So I'm starting personally first with the inside of my fish. You don't have to start with this part. I just wanted to. But this is going to help make our life a lot easier when we want to add any other detail to our fish, because we'll already have some color applied. So I'm really just painting carefully and neatly. I really like these brushes because they are nice for painting with fairly quickly, but I can also be pretty precise. I'm holding it like a pencil and thinking about how I can get those wide flat lines. So instead of going back and forth, just like with the marker or Sharpie, I'm pulling in one direction smoothly. If you're finding that your paint color is lighter than you want it to be, that might mean the paint needed a little more time to soak and absorb the color. So you can always add another drop of water to the paint and gently swirl it or pull it to create more of the paint color you want. So I'm painting very carefully, that way I can do my best job, and I'm trying to really fill in all of the white spots with one layer of paint. However, my paint really isn't that dark. I'm using mostly a light color just to get a wash of paint in my artwork. In the tail of the fish, I decided I'm using a few more colors, but I'm trying to apply the paint relatively lightly. If you want a lighter color, use more water and don't swirl the paint around with your brush for quite as long. Something to be aware of is that this paper is not necessarily watercolor paper, so it really does not want to get too wet. Sometimes with actual watercolor paper you can do a lot of really cool blending effects, but here we really want to only go over each part of our paper one time. So if you've already painted something, don't go back and keep painting on top. The paper will get too wet and it will be more likely to fall apart, which is something we don't want to happen. When you're done painting your fish, it might look something like this. Another tip is always make sure you're washing your brush out in between colors. We don't want to put our brush directly in one color and then in another because that would mix it up for everyone. Also, once I'm done with my fish, I am personally going to choose to paint the background with one of the cool colors for contrast because my fish is more warm colors. So consider doing a contrast so we can tell the difference between the fish and the background. But again, that's an opinion and recommendation. Your artwork you can ultimately paint with whatever colors you would like to paint it with. Similarly, when I paint the background, I will be very careful. I like to maybe start by carefully outlining so that I can make sure I'm sort of tracing with the brush, and then it'll make it easier to fill in the rest of the picture as I go. There you go. You can see I've started to fill in the edge, and I will keep working my way carefully all the way around the fish. I'm so excited to see your progress on your artworks today, and I hope you have fun.